from one superstar leader to another. We are thrilled to welcome Karla Childers. She's the Senior Director of Strategic Projects in the Office of the CMO at Johnson & Johnson. And she's going to be discussing some of the ethical implications of using patient data and the benefits of health tech to patients and consumers today. And I can't think of a more consumer-centric organization in the world than Johnson & Johnson. Is truly one of the healthcare brands that consumers think of first when they think of something in healthcare. Karla, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Stan. Nice to see you.
Really appreciate your time. We know how busy you are, but let's get down to brass tacks. Certainly, we've seen a lot of the changes that have taken place in healthcare and the intersections of where things are today. And as a part of your work at J&J, it's got certainly consumer, it's got pharma, which everyone knows now. I got the J&J vaccine and the one dose, and then obviously device and now digital. Where do you sit in the intersection of this really amazingly impactful and complex organization?
Definitely complex organization, but it's a privilege to serve there. I sit in the office of the chief medical officer. So about 20 years ago when I started in industry, I came in as a chemist. I have project management and now health law and bioethics. And so I use all of that experience in my role in the office of the chief medical officer, where I chair the internal bioethics committee and serve as a bioethics subject matter expert for a lot of policy working groups. So I get to see all kinds of super interesting questions coming in about innovations of how do we improve our ability to conduct research? How do we think about bringing new therapies and opportunities to patients and consumers? So I sit in a very busy intersection in the company, but it's super because as we press on innovation, as I'm sure you and I are going to get to, you have different considerations that you think about as you roll those out in the organization, and really just trying to help teams as they go through these types of innovations and product development, think about the different considerations from an ethical side.
And so within that then, and that's a brilliant answer. Thank you for the detail there. You obviously are working within this realm of health tech, and clearly as J&J is one of the leaders in health tech. How do you define health tech, and what do you see as the benefits to patients and consumers who are in the midst of really relying upon health tech more than ever?
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I think about health tech, both during my day job and my personal life, I mean, for me, it's the things like mobile applications, mobile devices, digital analytics, and that technology that supports the overall well-being. So for me, health tech is broader than just curative. It's really enhancing the entire well-being, but leveraging technology in really creative ways and innovative ways. And I mean, I think my perspective, the big benefit there is that you have an opportunity to equip individuals with knowledge, with awareness, with access to information and things that they might not have had otherwise, whether it's an activity tracker that's telling you you're not getting great sleep, or other types of education and kind of ways of engaging with people. So I see a tremendous amount of benefit of it, just empowering individuals with that type of information and the opportunity to use it for themselves, maybe not just in the context of the healthcare system.
That's great. And in your opinion, how can the healthcare industry and really society as a whole adapt to the changes that we're seeing in healthcare and tech? We've seen a lot of people earlier in the program today talk about the fact that there's been this big digital divide, but what are some of the things that you're seeing from your point of view and your position?
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think I see, for me, probably wearing my ethicist hat, I probably see two big areas to focus on. And one is sort of even building on my prior answer, is this idea around literacy and understanding and education. And I think we have a lot of people playing in this space that really are thinking about empowering individuals, just like I was talking about the tremendous benefit. But we also, I think, need to be mindful to not swing too far, such that we're possibly burdening or overwhelming individuals with the idea that I now have to be responsible for all of this and understand how all of these different pieces of my data come together and how I use them. So I think there's a really great opportunity to create individuals as partners in the process and upskill where there may be deficiencies in education or awareness or understanding. And I think that part will help create trust in that health tech space. And so I think education and literacy is important. I think for me, the other area that I tend to maybe worry about a little bit, or think that it's important to envision how we're going to adapt, and perhaps this was discussed earlier too, and I think Dr. Hegde actually just mentioned it, was about equitable accessibility and thinking about um, people and where they are, and that not everybody has the same access. And I think the pandemic was a really important reminder of that, of the assumptions around access to broadband, Wi-Fi, smartphones, and tablets is not universal. And so how do we continue to innovate and really press the edges of what's possible, as we've seen some tremendous innovations, while contemplating how that's going to be affecting the folks who might not have access to the same type of technology. So those are the two big areas where I think, as we continue to adapt and grow and incorporate interventions in us in that health tech space, that we want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and that's clearly, where the action is too. And when people are often worrying about their healthcare data, and we've seen, since 2009, when the DOJ Office of Civil Liberties started tracking this and publishing it, we've seen literally hundreds of breaches happen a year in with HIPAA and patient data. But when people are worried about their data and how it's being used and whatnot, we know that access to this data is critical for researchers. And there's been a number of publications that have talked about how HIPAA and data privacy laws have really held up a lot of research. And, just working with hospitals, there's layers and layers of legal documents to try to work with hospitals. Again, I'm working out of Columbia Medical Center, but we work with University of Pittsburgh, Stanford, a number of different hospitals around the country. And it can take months, if not over a year, to work out the different legal agreements before sharing data or doing any data analysis. What are some of the bioethical considerations that, from your perspective, the healthcare industry really needs to think about while addressing privacy, but also making sure that we're storing the data, and the data is being stored in a place and in a method that it can be used for research?
Yeah, and we often say, with no ill will toward any of our legal colleagues, that just the complexity of the legal agreements that are necessary can often be very difficult. But beyond that, I mean, I think where I usually start is that privacy is a piece of it, and we have to think about that. But for all those reasons you mentioned about security and use of data, it's really data stewardship over the entire spectrum of that. So how do you help people understand how their data will be used, so they will be more comfortable, perhaps, with more permissive uses of it, or more permissive availability of the data? How do you create governance and structure, and thinking about where do you need to have more tight control, and what type of data sets can you make available, and how do you kind of think about the authentic understanding that individual had when they had those data collected? So for me, thinking about stewardship as a whole across the continuum can help create comfort and confidence in the system, but then that creates an obligation on all of us using the data to do things like publish results, ensure there are secure platforms. And I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting opportunities in some of the areas that I'm not an expert in, but from a technical perspective, about federated data networks and innovative consortia that are creating these places where the data can have broader access. But again, I think individuals, from an ethical perspective, will want to see those benefits flow back into the healthcare system. And where I've seen some of the challenges is if people don't feel like the purported uses of their data are actually being used, especially for the context of research, to benefit them or the healthcare ecosystem. There, I think you have a little bit of a hollow request of them to make their data available. So I think it's that stewardship and a balance of obligations, that we all want our data to be used for good. So use it for good and help us work together on that.
Brilliant. And that is spot on. And that, certainly that sort of kind of ethic, bringing that out to the public, I think would rebuild a lot of the trust that we're seeing dissipating in what's happening today, certainly in the ecosystem. So, we want to really look at some of the barriers as well. And you discussed it a little bit, earlier, about some of the legal documents, whether it's first of all, it usually starts with an NDA, then it goes into a HIPAA agreement and a BII agreement, then it goes into a data usage agreement, et cetera. And it really is complicated. And again, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't even play one on TV, but it is unbelievably complicated, but it's necessary in terms of the structures. And all of these institutions have huge national brands and local brands. They need to mitigate risk all over the place. And so when you look at the barriers of data sharing and data transparency and what we're facing today, how can technology help us overcome some of those barriers?
Yeah, and this is something that's really interesting to me because I have seen some interesting solutions around federated data networks and how can we envision deploying models into secure data sets and then learning and then exporting them back out. So I do think, which is not my area of expertise, but I would exhort all those great minds that are listening to this, that as we think about how to create more connections and create these systems that can be trusted places that are going to have appropriate oversight and governance so that data can be maximized. So I think there's a real opportunity, and I think we have seen some innovation in that space. Where I am particularly interested in, from an ethics perspective, and thinking of things like terms of use and informed consent and authentic understanding of how data will be used, are there ways of using technology to tag, to annotate, to associate data with different types of permissions, to help people better understand and use technology in cases where we might want to go back to them? Because a lot of the barriers you hear are like, well, we can't contact these people, or we don't know how to find folks. And for some people, with all the ways we are found by technology, that rings a little hollow. Maybe so I feel like I can be found by just about anybody who wants to reach me. So how do we create appropriate connections of identification with health information, align that with permissions and ability to engage people in the process? So that's where I'm really interested in understanding what types of innovation could take place in creating partners of individuals in research to have their trust to allow appropriate research to proceed. And then when you do want more robust engagement, how can you find a system to do that?
That's really critical. Yeah, because if the trust isn't there under the light engagement, it's not going to be there for the robust engagement. That's for sure. And so, final question. We have a couple of minutes left, but as a society and certainly as ecosystem, stakeholders, how do we ensure that we're using health tech in a way that's as ethical as possible, and we're doing what we can to rebuild that trust?
It's a great question. I think, and not just to share sunshine with you or at you. I think having conversations like this with really innovative folks who are on the cutting edge of this technology. So continuing to develop technical expertise in ethicists, ethical expertise in innovators, and really have those conversations in consideration. So continue to have those conversations and understand the gray spaces where people might be thinking about doing things. I really do think investing in literacy and infrastructure and thinking more robustly about what that looks like from an equitable perspective, not just where we can afford it and not just where it currently exists, would be really important. And I do believe that that kind of engagement with individuals, understanding their perspective and how they expect their data to be used and what benefits they're expecting, will help create trust and an ethical approach to it that will allow them to be more willing to let their data be used and shared by people doing really critical, important research that's ultimately going to benefit all of us. So I would just say thank you for continuing to include this type of consideration in these conversations, because that's a big part of it.
That's fantastic. And thank you again for your time today. And we know how busy you are, and we really appreciate you taking some time out, not only today to join us, but also in the preparation time it took to get everything queued up with the HITLAB production team. So thank you very much. A virtual round of applause for Karla. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time today. And, again, we are so fortunate to have these digital health leaders, these really global healthcare leaders with us today.